the previous 2 weeks, Justin and Andrea, they've been helping us examine Paul's opening arguments, where he's positioning the difference between law and faith. For Paul, on the one side of the ledger is the law, and on the other side is that of faith. And for the sake of our time this morning, or when you hear or whenever you read in Galatians the word law, you can think of the Ten Commandments. You can think of all of the laws that are given in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. You can think of the simple lists of laws and then the more complex lists of laws. They are all the culmination of all of the things required of Israel to live in a manner pleasing to God. In the first 5 books of the Bible, in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, there are 613 different rules laid out for the people of Israel to follow. Now, something to keep in mind, just to say that the Bible is not a rule book, but rather it's a storybook. Now, of course, as soon as you say that, you're probably thinking, yo, but Matthew, look, you just said that in the first 5 books of the Bible, there's over 600 laws. And, I can't do the math real quick, but that's something in the neighborhood of 122.6 laws per book. And you would be right. But here's the thing. The Bible is ultimately a story of God's work to redeem humanity and renew creation. For those of you that have been participating in our recent seminar on understanding the Bible, you'll be familiar with some of this language. In the seminar, one of the things that we discussed was the ways that the Bible holds together as a single narrative with a single story aimed at communicating to humanity God's love and purpose for restoring humanity into right relationship with God, with others, and with the world around them. This is the single story of the Bible. In the Old Testament, the way that the story unfolds, particularly in the first 5 books, is that humanity rebels against God and God's love and does so repeatedly. And each time, God gives some instructions on how to restore and how to make things right. Things are made right, and then Israel rebels again, and God returns and he heals, and he gives additional instructions on how to live in a way that displays their love towards God and God's love towards them. Israel rebels again, and then God gives more instructions. And it's in this cyclical pattern of rebellion and restoration that this expansive list of laws gets established. Sometimes the laws, there are ones that deal with personal holiness. Other times they're laws that deal with interpersonal dealing. Sometimes the laws are ones that deal with matters of justice or economics or compassion. Other times the laws deal with just matters of worship and piety. But every time that the laws are established, they are responses to ways that God's people have turned away from the ways and promises of God and sought to make for themselves another way that ultimately led to brokenness and isolation. So it isn't that God takes 5 books in the Old Testament and then lays out all the laws and rules and regulations that he requires. I think that's probably how most of the time we imagine what the law is. But rather, it is in those books, there's a story. And in that story is a cycle of rebellion and then God's response of restoration that culminates in adjustments to the relationship. Adjustments articulated in the rules that God has then given. Adjustments to the relationship that God has with his people. But all of it is bound in restoration. Now, the shorthand for this pattern of rebellion and restoration and instructions that comes from this pattern, the shorthanded, abbreviated way to say that story is to say the law. And the painful truth was that people were never able to keep the law. They were never able to live in a manner that was faithful to the relationship with God. And something or someone was needed to break the cycle and create a way, not just for more rules or better laws, but rather to create a new heart, a new humanity that could begin to walk with God more faithfully and walk with humanity and creation more justly. And Jesus was the break in this pattern. Jesus was the one who was able to hold in his life and in his person all of the requirements of the law and take on in his death the consequences of the rebellion. Jesus on the cross took on the isolation and the brokenness that results from turning away from God's love. And in Jesus' resurrection, a way was made for those whose faith was in Jesus. A way was made for them to lay hold of the new heart and the new life and the new humanity that Jesus affords and the Spirit of God gives rise to.